The update from the National Hurricane Center in moments ago. Hurricane Sally now a Category 2 storm with a track that is shifting to the east. Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, all within the cone of uncertainty. We are live with the latest models here on Tracking the Tropics. Hey there, everybody. JB Buno here with you live in your hurricane headquarters, being joined on the top of your screen by Tracking the Tropic meteorologists Julie Phillips and Ian Oliver. Also being joined in the bottom left-hand portion of your screen by meteorologist John Conway. Joining us from Mississippi, WJTV. We'll be hearing from him shortly from Jackson. We'll also be taking some of the questions that you have on Facebook Live pertaining to Hurricane Sally. Again, now a Category 2 storm with a track that continues to nudge more and more to the east, also slowing down. For the latest on Hurricane Sally, we send things over to the wall where we find Tracking the Tropics meteorologist Julie Phillips. Hey there, Julie.
Hey, JB. We are tracking Hurricane Sally. Became a hurricane if you missed it. Earlier today, hurricane hunters were out in the storm and found out that it had strengthened pretty quickly. Right now, at the 5 o'clock update, they have upgraded it to a Category 2 hurricane with maximum winds at 100 miles per hour. This system, unfortunately, moving pretty slowly. We don't like it to just sit out over the water, and of course, the longer it sits there, the more heavy rain we'll see in spots. But it's moving to the west-northwest at 6 miles per hour. So the system continues to strengthen. As you take a closer look in, you can see portions of the Florida Panhandle from Pensacola, you can see east through around the Destin area, already seeing some of the outer bands of this system, bringing some pockets of heavy rain and gusty winds. The eye of the system, though, still well south of the coast. And it is moving west-northwest in the general direction right now of Louisiana. But the latest track that came in from the National Hurricane Center really has that landfall kind of narrowing in on coastal Mississippi through coastal Alabama. And so this is the area that we're looking at for landfall, likely Tuesday night or potentially even into Wednesday at this point, as it is expected to move at a pretty slow pace over the coming 24 to 48 hours. Unfortunately, not expected to weaken much, only continue to strengthen some. It will be a strong Category 2 at landfall at this point, but again, 111 miles per hour is what we're looking at for this to be considered a major hurricane, a Category 3 storm. So that's definitely in the realm of possibilities at this point. Once it does make landfall, it's going to continue to still move pretty slowly, bringing very heavy rain through the Florida Panhandle, and then weaken pretty quickly as it does move north and east, and then just bringing rain into places like Georgia and northern Alabama as it does shift off to the north and east. Our spaghetti models right now, you can see the majority of them from western Mississippi through Alabama, even into the far, far western portions of the Florida Panhandle. But it really looks like Mississippi, Alabama at this point is where we are going to see the landfall. Can't completely rule out western Louisiana, though. Again, not a whole lot of room for error to see that happen. And then this system will curve off to the north and east. Hurricane warnings have already been posted for New Orleans east through Mobile at this point, including the western portions of Florida right now, where we are expecting those hurricane force winds. Also, a lot of really heavy rain expected. We're talking 10 to 20 inches of rain, and then a storm surge warning has been posted as well in this area. We're looking at a potential storm surge where we have landfall just east of it, potentially in the 7 to 11 foot range. That was the last update from the National Hurricane Center. So coastal Mississippi from around Gulfport to Mobile, right now you're probably going to see the worst when it comes to the storm surge from this system, which is likely why some of those evacuation orders along the coast have been posted. You can see that storm surge potential right now. Again, western Louisiana expecting probably 3 to 6 feet potentially. And as you head into Mobile Bay and again along coastal Mississippi, we could really see some higher numbers there with this system. Flood alerts also in effect because, again, this system is moving slowly. The longer it's able to sit out in the Gulf and slowly move in means we're going to continue to see heavy rain bands set up over areas. If we're already seeing those rain bands along the coast and the system isn't even expected to make landfall until tomorrow night or maybe even Wednesday morning, you can imagine the amount of rain that we're going to be seeing. So that's why a flood watch has been issued for that area. The rainfall potential, as we put this in motion for you, you can really see all of that purple you see here. I mean, we're talking about a widespread area of 7 to probably 15 inches of rain here, again, across portions of Mississippi, eastern Louisiana, and as you head over into Alabama from Mobile all the way up. I mean, even places like Tuscaloosa are talking about the potential of about 6 inches of rain from the system as that kind of just slowly crawls along the northern Gulf Coast. It's going to get picked up from a front, and that will kind of carry it off to the north and east finally a little bit quicker. But in the coming days, it's going to continue to bring some really heavy rainfall. And we just passed the peak of hurricane season. It's September 10th. And right now we have several systems out in the tropics right now, including Paulette and Renee. I'm going to have you join us, Ian, and also John, because we've got a whole lot to talk about besides just Hurricane Sally. Of course, Hurricane Sally at the forefront right now because it is a hurricane right now expected to make landfall in the U.S., but there are several other systems out there that we're keeping a close eye on too. Ian?
Yeah, of course, the peak of the season, that was 4 days ago, like you mentioned, Julie, but we're really seeing that well above average activity continuing. We've seen that all season as we continue on this very, very rapid pace. This is Paulette and Renee, and some good news for you. Renee is no more. That was per the 5 o'clock update from the National Hurricane Center. It dissipated, thankfully. Now, Paulette, if you were watching last night, the eye of the storm actually passed directly over Bermuda. There's a satellite picture of the eye, and you can see the entire island inside that eye. Very remarkable imagery. The storm is still strengthening as it moves away now from Bermuda, thankfully. Conditions have been improving throughout the second half of the day in Bermuda, but you see that could become our next major hurricane. In fact, that is the forecast from the National Hurricane Center, becoming a Category 3 perhaps tonight or at some point during the day tomorrow. So that's where we stand with those. One strengthening and one that's no more with us. And Renee, Teddy and Vicky, these are two new systems that also developed today. Teddy forecast also to become a major hurricane. You see that curve, though, thankfully. The forecast track from the National Hurricane Center keeps the system over water, so that one's not going to be impacting land, thankfully, as that eventually becomes a powerful hurricane. The opposite can be said about Vicky, which is only going to be with us, looks like, for maybe a day at the most, briefly becomes a tropical storm, runs into some wind shear on the eastern side of Teddy, and that should help to really disrupt the organization of that system. Now, besides that, there is another tropical wave. You're probably getting used to hearing that at this point, emerging off the coast of Africa. This one actually just got bumped up, its development chance up to 50% in the next 5 days. So that could be the possibility of that one being the last name on the list this year, a Wilfred, before we get into the Greek alphabet. And then back in the western part of the Gulf of Mexico, this one has a lower chance, just a 20% chance of development over the next 5 days. Possibility we could see a little weak something develop in the western part of the Gulf and enhance the rain, maybe the southern portion of Texas and mostly into the higher terrain of Mexico. So that's where we stand outside of Sally at this point. But JB, we discussed this earlier this afternoon. Structure was a problem yesterday. It's been a remarkable 6 hours in the Gulf of Mexico for Sally. Once the structure developed that really well-defined inner core, it's been all gas, unfortunately, since that point. We've seen this intensification. We had a recon flight earlier today, 11 a.m. The 11 a.m. update. It was just 65 miles per hour, still a tropical storm. Recon flight found what was a much stronger system, and unfortunately, that's what just happened again this evening, which is why we saw the bump up to a Category 2 storm. Still a possibility we could see some additional upside with this system. John?
Yeah, we've been watching this pretty carefully as well. It's been a remarkable change. The storm looks so much healthier than it did yesterday. Of course, here in Mississippi, we are pleased with any sort of eastward shifts to this track as it's going to push the worst of the weather off into Alabama. Not that we wish it on them. But yesterday, we were looking at the potential for extremely heavy rain in the Pine Belt, which is the Hattiesburg-Laurel portion of southeastern Mississippi. And there's still a chance. You know, what we're telling folks in Mississippi right now, especially down on the Gulf Coast, is to be cautiously optimistic because the storm is moving really slowly. In the latest advisory, the speed is down to 6 miles per hour. And when you have storms not moving that quickly, just a 1 mile per hour change in its forward speed or just a little bit of a change in the direction can really shift that cone back around to the west or the east. But we are still cautioning folks in southeastern Mississippi and especially down on the Gulf Coast to hope for the best but prepare for the worst. Half a foot of rain or more going to be likely, and we're also still looking at that potential for that life-threatening storm surge in the Gulfport Biloxi area to Pascagoula. And then, of course, up Mobile Bay. Looks like it's going to bear the brunt of a lot of that storm surge, too, as the Storm surge moves its way into the bay, which contains it, and then you have the heavy rain trying to drain out of the rivers, the creeks, the bayous. It's going to struggle to drain because the waters are so high in the bays and the inlets there.
John Conway joining us, everybody, from WJTV in Jackson, Mississippi. Also being joined here by Ian Oliver. I'm JB Buno. What we want to do, everybody, as you've probably seen in previous episodes of Tracking the Tropics, we take questions for our meteorologists here, Ian and John. If you'd like to ask a question to Ian or John, use the hashtags on your screen. Hashtag Hey Ian, hashtag Hey John. We'll allow a few minutes here for these questions to populate on Facebook Live. Again, if you use one of those hashtags, we will pluck them from various Facebook pages, especially from Facebook pages in Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and the Florida Panhandle. So if you'd like to ask a question, use one of those hashtags, and we'll look for them in about 2 to 3 minutes time. But bringing back in Ian and John here, when we're looking here, guys, at the speed of this system, we're talking about a lot of rain here. And one of the things, too, that we're talking about here also, we've been talking about New Orleans over the last several days. New Orleans being right there at the center of the cone of uncertainty, but now things sort of shifting to the east. But that doesn't necessarily mean that, Ian, that New Orleans is out of harm's way.
Absolutely not. And this is a Category 2 hurricane in close proximity. You absolutely have to keep your guard up. But the trends, at least, have been better for New Orleans, at least when we're talking from a broad standpoint. You mentioned all the rainfall. We talked a little bit about this earlier as well. There's a higher than normal degree of uncertainty with where exactly this center of circulation is going to come on shore. And of course, we always talk about that northeastern quadrant as where we see the most intense, really the worst of a hurricane in terms of not only the storm surge, highest winds, and oftentimes the highest amount of rainfall. You look at that, and that margin is razor thin along and east of that center of circulation where the storm moves on shore and eventually inland. That's not a lot of mileage there in between areas that see very little in terms of rainfall and areas that see 10 to more than 20 inches of rainfall as a possibility. That's what that rainfall potential is showing you there. And there is also the possibility that this may shift a little bit farther off to the east. We saw the center actually reformed a little bit earlier today. It's a little bit of a jog back farther off to the north and east. Stalled out a bit, and now this system is slowly back on that west-northwest track. So it's moving at such a slow pace at this point. When exactly it starts making that turn to the north and eventually into the northeast, there's still a decent amount of uncertainty with that. And that's going to really determine who catches the worst of Sally, unfortunately. So this entire portion of the central Gulf Coast needs to be aware. And something we should point out, just reading through the latest advisory, the 5 o'clock that just came in from the National Hurricane Center, because of that shift to the east, you get those hurricane warnings back up, and I'll see if this is automatically updated. Yes, so now a portion of the Florida Panhandle, the far western portion of the Florida Panhandle, is now included in the hurricane warning. That is a change as of the 5 p.m. update. So that's just kind of letting you into the National Hurricane Center thinking as far as, yes, the signals here from the forecast models, a little bit slower perhaps and a little bit farther off to the east. European forecast model, I know a lot of people are always asking about that one. That one's the slowest of the bunch, and actually this by a large margin. So we certainly hope that is not the case. Rest of the forecast ensemble brings the system on shore, and then it eventually gets picked up by a trough. There's a little bit of a weakness in that area of high pressure that's right now steering it off to the west-northwest. That lets up. And something else we should point out in the discussion from the National Hurricane Center, the global models, including the European, all start putting some extra wind shear on the system as it approaches the coast tomorrow. That is some good news, because we've been sitting here many times, JB, talking about systems that are just intensifying at a very fast clip all the way up until landfall. Should that be the case tomorrow, it would kind of put an upside cap on the intensity of that system, essentially where the National Hurricane Center has it right now. That's why it is their forecast. That's what they're thinking. So hopefully that comes to fruition. We get some extra wind shear on the system, because we saw what happened when the wind shear relaxed and this system got stacked up. We've seen so much intensification over the course of the day today. Hopefully that's not the case anymore tomorrow with some extra wind shear.
All right, everybody, let's open up the meteorologist Q&A portion of our stream. If you've been with us here before, you know how this works. You see on the right side of your screen, hashtag Hey Ian, hashtag Hey John, hashtag Hey JB. Use one of these hashtags in the Facebook Live comment section if you would like to get a question directly through to one of the meteorologists that we have here on your stream. Again, that being Ian Oliver and John Conway joining us from WJTV in Jackson, Mississippi. And I believe the first one that we have, we're going to start with WMBB's Facebook page because we saved them sort of for the last one on the last stream. We're going to lead with them here today to say thank you for all of our Panama City viewers over there on the Florida Panhandle. Samantha is asking from WMBB's Facebook page in Panama City, hashtag Hey Ian, hashtag Hey John, what do we need to expect in Panama City? And when we're talking about Panama City, you guys, we're talking about an area that wasn't necessarily that close to the storm in the track as of 24 hours ago, but now definitely more of a factor here, 5 o'clock Eastern time this Monday, September 14th. Ian?
Yeah, unfortunately, that is the case. The trend, because of that, you're going to need to have a much closer look at that. And I'll pull up the forecast track. We should talk about how far displaced from the center some of those tropical storm force gust winds are. The impact, we always talk about the cone. Impacts are felt well outside the cone, and that'll be the case with this system. Even with that jog off to the east, I do think in Panama City, you're at minimum going to see a lot of rainfall with this, likely some gusty winds, perhaps up to the tropical storm force sustained, a possibility with this. Really going to need to watch this one over the course of the day tomorrow to see how far east that wobble ends up happening. Obviously, a track to the west would reduce the impacts that you feel there across portions of Panama City. Let me get that rainfall tally pulled back up for you. Yep, there you go. So we're talking about right in the Panama City area, the possibility of some of that heavier rainfall. Should that cheat just a little bit farther to the east, that's where you get under a much more of that flash flooding risk, in addition to some of the gustier winds that'll come with a more eastward track with this one. So you saw that a hurricane warning was extended into the far western portion of the Panhandle. You need to be preparing as such at this point and just hoping for the best.
John?
Yeah, and the other thing, too, about Panama City is that it looks like it's probably going to be, whatever the storm does, it's going to be on that eastern side of the storm in that right front quadrant, which is where we typically see the greatest tornado threat as well. And some of those tornadoes can develop even in some of the outermost bands. And as Ian said before, we don't want to focus too much on that cone of uncertainty. That cone of uncertainty is just simply saying where the center of the storm could pass. So even if the storm tracks right along the very eastern edge of that cone of uncertainty, yeah, like Ian said, in Panama City, you're looking at incredible amounts of rainfall, the storm surge as well, in addition to the severe weather threat from tornadoes spinning up as well. Now, and of course, tornadoes in hurricanes typically are pretty brief and usually not much stronger than EF1 or EF2. But in EF0 tornadoes, something here in Mississippi, we get a lot of tornadoes. Even an EF0 tornado can destroy mobile home or some of those more lightly constructed homes that are not firmly anchored to the ground. So Panama City, keep on this forecast right now, because if this eastward, or you're on the east side of the storm, that's the worst side of the storm. If this eastward trend continues, you could find yourself in some pretty wild weather. At the same time, though, I also want to caution the folks to the west of the storm in much of Mississippi and Louisiana. The track jogged slightly to the west earlier this afternoon, and it's still not out of the realm of possibility that we could see a couple changes in the track because the storm is moving so slowly. Just a slight change, forward speed or direction, can shift that cone farther to the west or quite a bit farther to the east. So, yeah, definitely keep your heads up in Panama City.
We're going to work our way now to the west. We're going to go to Tommy Owen from WKRG's Facebook page in Alabama. Hashtag HeyJB, hashtag HeyJohn, hashtag HeyIan. He's really got the hashtag system down. We are new to Fairhope right there on Mobile Bay. What should we expect here? That's the Baldwin County side of Mobile Bay, the eastern side, right near Pensacola. So let's answer, this question here for Tommy. We're talking about Fairhope there, Baldwin County, Alabama. We're talking about Pensacola there, you guys. Ian, why don't we start with you? I mean, again, that's the worst side to be on, right?
This was a fear that we were talking about with Chief Meteorologist Ed Bloodsworth from Mobile earlier today at KRG, would be a more eastward track than what we were expecting with the 11 a.m. update. And yes, this latest update from the National Hurricane Center, that entire forecast cone has been moved slightly farther to the east. So that is not a good trend for the Mobile area. I just looked at the latest update. tropical storm force winds extend out about 125 miles from the center of circulation. That'll especially be the case in that northeastern quadrant. Hurricane force winds extend out about 25 miles from that center. So that's about as tight as a look we can get there on Mobile Bay. But you see that center of circulation is not far back to the west. So this would be a scenario that would enhance storm surge, that would bring the heaviest of the rainfall, and perhaps, if you get into that inner core of the system, the brunt of the system. So this is going to be one in the Alabama coastline and the Mississippi coastline. All portions of the central Gulf Coast here in the hurricane warned area need to treat this at this point as if you're going to catch the worst of Hurricane Sally, which unfortunately at this point is looking to be a higher end Category 2 hurricane. All the impacts that come along with that, including that storm surge. We can get that pulled up for you so you can see what you can expect through portions of Mobile Bay, which I believe earlier the forecast, there it is right there as we're zooming in a little bit. Yeah, we got some orange in there. I believe that forecast was in the 6 to 7 foot range. There is the possibility, should that center of circulation pass just west of Mobile Bay, that we would see an enhancement with that, and that would of course lead to some greater coastal flooding issues. So that's what we'll be watching very closely tonight. And as John mentioned, it's the minutia. It's really going to be the little stuff with this. Little shifts in that center of circulation, direction and speed are going to have huge impacts with this over the next 24 to 36 hours.
John, I want to bring you in here for a comment from your Facebook page, WJTV. Sandra Hudson's commenting, hashtag Hey John, what to expect in Pass Christian. Want to know particularly about surge there, what we could see in the days ahead. John?
This is going to be a tough forecast for Pass Christian. It's down in Hancock County. That is the westernmost county down on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. And this is where the big question marks come, because that center of the storm is likely to pass not too far away. There's still a landfall on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, still very much in the cards. If the center, first things first, we are going to see some higher seas in Pass Christian probably over the next 24 to 36 hours, because the storm is to the south and east, and we have those winds out of the east on the north side of the storm that's pushing water into the New Orleans area. I think that's why the storm surge warning is still in effect for New Orleans, because we have the storm pushing water from the east up against New Orleans, and that's going to be backing up against the Mississippi Gulf Coast. So we are going to see some higher than normal tides over the next 24 to 36 to possibly 48 hours of Pass Christian. Now, where the center of the storm passes is going to be key. If the center of that storm passes east of Pass Christian, even as close as Gulfport, Biloxi, that's going to reduce the risk of the storm surge quite a bit in Pass Christian, and the worst of the storm surge going to be off to the east over toward Gulfport, Biloxi, Pascagoula, and into the Mobile Bay area like we were talking about just a few moments ago. However, there is still that possibility, like Ian mentioned, that the small little changes in the forecast could bring the eye directly over Pass Christian, could bring it just to the west of Pass Christian, which would be the worst case scenario. So for folks anywhere along the Gulf Coast of Mississippi, or even into Louisiana and Alabama and into the Florida Panhandle, evacuation orders, just keep them. And the other thing to mention too is have more than one evacuation route, because we're talking about the heavy rain. It's very possible that your primary evacuation route could be closed due to water over the roadway. With the gusty winds, it's possible your primary evacuation route could be blocked by downed trees or downed tree limbs. So there's just so much uncertainty in exactly where the storm is going to go. So yeah, Pass Christian, while things are looking up in the latest model runs and the latest guidance from the National Hurricane Center, we're not out of the woods. We have not dodged a bullet. We haven't dodged anything yet. Still a lot can change in this forecast. Heads up in Pass Christian, and for everyone else, if an evacuation order is given, get out of there, because it could be very difficult, especially in some of those areas where you have backwaters behind the shore. Some of those roads and bridges could be out once the worst of the storm comes.
As we continue to monitor your Facebook comments here, everybody, as a reminder, you can use the hashtag Hey Ian, hashtag Hey JB, hashtag Hey John if you want to ask a question. We're going to be live with you for a few more minutes here on Tracking the Tropics, taking some of your questions, trying to give you some perspective as to what the latest models from the National Hurricane Center mean for your neighborhood, your community, where you live. The next one actually very, very topical one here. Patricia Jackson from WMBB in Florida asking, hashtag Hey Ian, wanting to know about Lake Charles. Ian, Lake Charles, of course, was an area that was decimated by Hurricane Laura.
Yeah, this is an excellent question. And of course, coming off the heels as the recovery continues across that portion of Louisiana, trends have been good now for Louisiana as a whole. Still the southeastern portion of Louisiana, we're talking about that possibility of hurricane conditions still. The shift has been to the east, more towards Mississippi and Alabama, even the western portion of the Panhandle, seeing some of the greater impacts. So with this one, of course, as recovery efforts are ongoing, the last thing you want to see is another significant hurricane in Sally heading in that direction. But you can see this is well removed from that portion of Louisiana, thankfully. And that is not a threat at this point for this part of the area. In fact, with the counterclockwise circulation around Sally, you may actually see some slightly drier than normal air than you might expect for this time of the year in the southwestern portion of Louisiana. So some good news with that. I'll show you the spaghetti plots here, the forecast model thinking, in addition to the National Hurricane Center track, just to show you those forecast tracks are well removed to the east of Lake Charles by several hundred miles. JB.
Next question coming in. It's from Carla Nixon Carlson from WGNO's Facebook page. This is the first question that we're taking in the stream from the New Orleans area. Hashtag Hey John, what can Diamond Head, Mississippi expect? Diamond Head being just a little bit west of Gulfport. I mean, right there on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, right there on Interstate 10. So that whole area, John, we're talking Gulfport, Biloxi, even west into, again, right there on the Louisiana Gulf Coast. I mean, this is an area that's going to get hit pretty hard.
Yeah, anywhere on the Gulf Coast, including Diamond Head, you've got to be ready to evacuate because even if the center of the storm passes off to your east, there's still the potential for heavy, heavy rainfall. And one thing I didn't mention before with storm surge and the heavy rainfall is, you know, the storm surge, there is going to be a little bit of surge all along the Mississippi Gulf Coast, even if the storm passes off to the east, because we have those easterly winds that are pushing the water into the bays and inlets. And right now, the high tides along the Mississippi Gulf Coast are in the morning. And when the waters are high in the bays, it makes it more difficult for the streams and bayous to drain out of there. And, you know, there's still the potential on the west side of the storm, especially close to that center, that there could still be, you know, quite a few inches of rain. It's now, of course, not as wet on that side of the storm, but that, you know, there could be those few inches of rain that could block those evacuation routes. So in Diamond Head, I think you're going to expect at least some pretty gusty winds. You're going to see some down tree limbs, even a few down trees. Power outages, definitely a possibility all along the Gulf Coast. Even if that storm tracks off to the east, we can still see those winds gusting to tropical storm strength, if not hurricane strength, a little farther to the east. So in Diamond Head, you know, batten down the hatches, and if you are under an evacuation order, you know, heed it just simply because this track could still shift slightly to the west, and we always want to err on the side of caution. And if you are in Diamond Head, I'm not sure if that's in Harrison or Hancock County, but they do have evacuation orders for portions of Hancock County, which is where Bay St. Louis and Pass Christian are. So gusty winds, heavy rain, and possibly some high waters in the Diamond Head, Mississippi area.
Another question that's coming in here is a community that I've been wondering about here pertaining to Hurricane Sally. We're paying attention to WDHN's Facebook page, and that is in Dothan, Alabama. Debbie Sanders Creekmore from WDHN's Facebook page, hashtag Hey Ian, what about Dothan, Alabama? Dothan a bit more inland, but right there in the cone as far as Hurricane Sally. Yeah,
you said it, JB. Obviously, the surge, not a concern, but rain, this was always, even before we had this period of intensification that we've seen over the last 6 and some change hours, rain was always going to be a huge feature with this. So that's what I would really be concerned with in Dothan. Still the possibility. I'm still wondering where exactly that center of circulation comes on shore and how close the proximity actually is to Dothan. We could see it a little bit closer because of the shifts that we've seen today. And the heavy rain would shift along with it. So that's what I'm wondering here. I'm trying to take a look now as we take a peek. Yeah, it's going to be close. In fact, it could perhaps even be a sweet spot for rainfall, depending on where exactly that center comes ashore. So be prepared for that, especially if you live in a flood-prone area, when it comes to extreme heavy rain events, you may want to be somewhere else. You're going to want to evacuate, especially, of course, if those orders have been given. But specifically, if you live in a flood-prone area, you should probably be making those decisions for yourself in the short term. But watch this very closely as we move through the rest of the overnight hours, the first part of the day tomorrow. We're going to be with you every step of the way here. So we'll bring you the latest updates, where exactly we're expecting the heaviest of the rainfall. That is definitely a spot that could see a whole lot over the next couple of days, JB.
The final question we're going to take here is one that we're seeing a question across multiple Facebook pages, one that that I think it was John and Ian. Actually, you both brought this up earlier here, so I'm going to ask you both here to weigh in on Chris Kaufman's comment from KARK's Facebook page in Arkansas, hashtag Ian. What is causing the shift east and west so much? So you were both noting earlier on in the stream that this is a storm that's been jogging a little bit, almost taking steps left, right, like left foot, right foot, left foot, right foot, kind of jogging almost northward towards the Gulf Coast itself. So what do we say here to Chris Kaufman?
It's funny because the answer to that is kind of the lack of upper level systems pushing on it. We always talk about, oh, we have an upper level ridge, we have an upper level trough. It's very weak. There is a weak area of high pressure across the southeastern United States. We're waiting on a trough of low pressure that's moving across the middle part of the country. But right now, there just isn't a whole lot pressing on the system. And we had that kind of formation of that inner core. Now that that's very well developed, we can start seeing how those weak influences push on it. But we had this kind of lopsided mess of a system first thing this morning with weak upper level currents pressing on it. That's a very difficult scenario to figure out the evolution of the system and where it's going to go in terms of intensity and eventual track. Now those things are starting to come into a little bit better picture. So I think as we move through the next forecast model runs, the hurricane hunters have essentially been in this nonstop now, sampling the system. So the farther we go from here, I think we're going to start seeing much more of a consensus. But where we were earlier today, it's pretty difficult to develop a consensus. But this could be the forecast models essentially correcting themselves as they're getting a better picture of Sally. John?
And it's really hard for the forecast models to handle sometimes, because when we're talking about such slow forward motion, right now 6 miles per hour, and it looks like it's been slowing. Just a change of 1 mile per hour is a pretty significant percentage change in the total speed. So if it increases its speed by 1 to 2 miles per hour, that's nearly a 33% increase in the forward speed, and that would push that forecast cone much farther to the west, in quite a bit. I mean, compared to, say, if it were going 15 miles per hour, a 1 to 2 mile per hour difference change, the models wouldn't have too big of a problem handling it. But when it's so slow, remember Hurricane Dorian last year kind of sat on top of the northern Bahamas for so long. There were so many questions because you didn't have those strong steering currents like Ian just mentioned, and the storm was moving so slowly that even the slightest changes in speed and direction over an extended period of time mean that forecast cone could shift quite a bit to the west. I mean, we could see the entire Gulf Coast of Mississippi back in the worst part of it. It could also shift it well off to the east, and we could start seeing the worst effects headed out over to places like Dothan, over toward Panama City, and maybe even as far east as Apalachicola. I don't think that's a likely scenario. But and the other thing, too, with the slow motion, too, it's out over water. We've seen rapid intensification. Category 2 hurricane at landfall. I don't think it's too terribly likely, but we saw what happened with Laura. We need to keep an eye out for that rapid intensification as well, and just see how the forward motion of the storm continues to evolve over the next 24 hours.
We can't get to the hundreds of hashtag comments that we've seen come in across half a dozen, maybe a dozen or so Facebook pages in the area of where Hurricane Sally is going to make its presence felt. But I want to just quickly, because we've had so many questions come in from particular areas here, and I just kind of want to go over some of the communities that are expecting significant impacts here from Hurricane Sally, one where maybe you're starting to think about evacuating, or you are talking about evacuating. We're talking about Gulfport, we're talking about Biloxi, Pascagoula, Bayou La Battery, Dothan Island, crossing over now into Alabama. We're talking about Mobile, we're talking about Gulf Shores, Orange Beach, Fairhope, but really Baldwin County in Alabama, Pensacola, Florida. We're talking about Fort Walton Beach, really the western end of the Florida the western end of the Florida Panhandle. These are all areas, everybody. It's really important now for you to stay in touch with your local meteorologist and your local emergency response officials to ensure that you are doing the best thing for you and your family, and making sure that you have a plan in place now in these hours ahead of Sally's arrival. We'll be back with you with regular updates on Track in the Tropics to make sure that you are aware to the very latest coming down from the National Hurricane Center. We'll be doing more interactive discussions like this one to take your questions on Facebook Live and hopefully be here as a resource to help you out as Hurricane Sally gets closer and closer to a landfall, which we anticipate, Ian, I would imagine what we're talking about, a landfall event sometime Tuesday. Maybe if this really slows down, we're talking about the early morning hours Wednesday, maybe a landfall event somewhere on the Mississippi, Alabama coastline.
Yep. There's the uncertainty there. Some point late tomorrow, early Wednesday looks to be a pretty good bet at this point. Hopefully earlier, because we want to limit, as John was mentioning, we want to limit that time spent over the very warm water of the Gulf.
So really important, everybody, for you to stay in the know. And we'll be back, everybody, with regular streams of Track in the Tropics to keep you and your family in the know as to the very latest from the National Hurricane Center. I want to thank WJTV meteorologist John Conway joining us from Jackson, Mississippi. And as always, Track in the Tropics meteorologist Ian Oliver here in your hurricane headquarters. I'm JB Buno. More updates as they come from the National Hurricane Center here live on Track in the Tropics. Thanks so much for being with us, everybody.
Thank you for watching Tracking the Tropics. Thank you for watching Tracking the Tropics.